The house that dreamed, in a forgotten valley, surrounded by hills that never woke and trees that leaned in too close, there stood a house with a crooked spine and blind, dust-covered windows. The seasons passed over it like waves over a sunken ship, but the house remained, unchanged, unclaimed, and untouched. No road led there anymore. The earth had healed over the trail like scar tissue. Brambles and thorns had grown thick across where children once ran and wagons rolled. Even the birds, who chattered over every field and forest, flew wide around this place. They didn't sing here. The locals in the village below, if you could even call it a village anymore, barely spoke of the house. Some called it the Briar House. Others simply called it the End. And no one had been seen going near it in years, decades maybe. Time had rubbed its name from memory, like a chalkboard left in the rain. But the house remembered. It remembered the creak of boots across its floorboards, the warmth of soup simmering in its kitchen, the faint perfume of lilacs drifting in from the garden. It remembered hands turning the brass knobs of its doors, remembered being swept and dusted and loved. It had once been alive. A family lived there, though their names were now as vague as dreams after waking. Sometimes at night, when the moon hung low and silver mist coiled through the trees, the house began to dream. Shutters that hadn't moved in years would twitch open just a crack. A sigh would rise from beneath the floorboards. And if you stood very, very still, if you pressed your ear to the rotted front door, you might just hear it whispering. Whispers like wind through hollow bones. It was mid-autumn when Evelyn Blackthorne arrived in the village. She was not from there. She wasn't really from anywhere anymore. A travel writer with no readers and no deadlines, she had driven across half the country on broken roads and fading gas stations, searching for places that had fallen off the map. Forgotten towns. Places that whispered when they should have screamed. She arrived in Gloamhaven, a village with no sign to announce it, by accident. Or so she thought. The fog had grown thick on the hillside, swallowing her headlights, until all that remained was a single flickering lantern swinging on a crooked pole. She followed it, parked her car at the edge of an old square that looked like it hadn't been swept since the war, and stepped out into silence. Everything about the place felt paused. The stone fountain in the center no longer flowed. The shops stood dark and shuttered. Even the church bell tower stood without a cross, as if ashamed of itself. And yet, someone had left a letter. It was folded once, tied with twine, and placed on the bench beside the fountain. Evelyn spotted it the moment she stepped into the square. She wouldn't have noticed if it had been white or yellow, but it was midnight black, darker than the sky above. The paper was warm to the touch, though the wind bit cold. There was no writing on the outside, but something compelled her to open it. Inside, the page was blank. She turned it over. Blank again, but as she held it, words began to rise, slow and faint like breath on glass. Not ink. No pen had touched it. The words formed themselves as if the letter had been waiting for her. You've come. The house is ready. 3.7 miles north. Follow the lanterns. Do not stray from the path. Not even once. Evelyn's breath caught. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she couldn't look away. The letters slowly dissolved as she watched, disappearing like they'd never been there. She looked around. The square was still silent, but something felt different, like she was no longer alone. She slipped the letter into her coat pocket, and in that moment, the first lantern flickered to life on the edge of the square. Then another, and another dot a trail of golden eyes through the mist, pulling her north. The lanterns flickered in a line like will-o'-the-wisps, leading into the forest just beyond the square. Evelyn hesitated only once, at the edge of the first tree line, where the fog grew thick and the ground turned soft beneath her boots. But something in her chest stirred. Not fear. Not excitement. Either recognition. She didn't remember the name Gloamhaven, but it felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Like a word you dream of and forget by morning. But that still leaves an echo behind your ribs. The trail was narrow. Trees loomed tall and skeletal, their limbs twisting upward like grasping fingers. Every so often, a lantern hung from a branch, glowing warm despite the chill in the air. No wires. No posts. They simply hung, gently swinging in a breeze that didn't exist. Crunch. Evelyn froze. That hadn't been her footstep. She turned, but the path behind her was empty. Only fog. The lanterns blinked behind her like sleepy eyes. Waiting. She shook her head. Stop it, she whispered to herself. It's just a story. But what story? She couldn't recall. Another 100 paces, and the forest thickened. The trees now curved inward, and the path narrowed to barely more than a deer trail. Brambles clawed at her coat. Once or twice, she saw shapes in the fog too tall for animals, too thin for people. They never moved. She told herself they were stumps or scarecrows or tricks of the light. Then she reached the stone arch. It rose from the ground like something unearthed, its surface covered in moss and runes she couldn't read. A single lantern hung at its peak. Just beyond, the fog parted, and she saw the house. It sat hunched in a clearing of black grass, its silhouette sagging with age. The roof slanted like it was bowing. Windows were dark but open, like watching eyes. The door stood slightly ajar, waiting. As she stepped through the arch, the fog stopped behind her. Dead still. Then the lanterns all went out at once. She was alone now, and the house began to dream. Evelyn stood still in the clearing, the silence pressing in like thick velvet. Without the lanterns, the forest behind her felt erased. She couldn't even see the arch anymore. The only light came from the sliver of moon above, casting a pale sheen over the broken roof tiles and leaning porch of the house. She took a slow breath. The air smelled like old wood and something sweeter underneath, honeysuckle maybe, or lilac. Strange for autumn. Stranger still, it reminded her of a scent she hadn't known she'd forgotten. Her mother's perfume, maybe, or her grandmother's garden. She couldn't tell. The front door opened just a little more. It was not the wind. There was no wind. Every tree in the clearing stood perfectly still, frozen in mid-sway like they'd been caught moving when they shouldn't. The grass didn't ripple. Even Evelyn's breath felt louder than it should. Still, she stepped forward. The porch groaned under her boots. Moss had overtaken the floorboards, and cobwebs hung like curtains in every corner. But the door remained open, just enough to suggest it wasn't locked. Just enough to welcome her in. Inside, the dark was almost total. Her hand slid along the wall and found an old brass switch. Click! Light flickered to life. Not electric, but gas, as if from an old sconce behind the wall. It hissed faintly, casting golden firelight over the narrow hallway. The wallpaper was peeling, a faded blue with a pattern of birds that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. She took another step in. The door swung shut behind her. She didn't jump. She should have. But the sound didn't startle her. If anything, it felt right, like the house was tucking her in, sealing her away from the night. "Hello," she called softly. Her voice didn't echo. No answer. Just the ticking of a clock deeper inside. Steady, patient, familiar. She walked forward slowly, past dusty portraits whose eyes seemed to touch too lifelike. The air grew warmer with each step. Then came a sound. A low sigh. Like settling. Her breathing. She froze. Is someone here? Silence. Then the ticking clock stopped. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her breath caught in her throat. The clock, whatever ancient, unseen mechanism had been ticking away somewhere in the house, had simply stopped. No slowing, no winding down. Just sudden, uncanny silence. Her footsteps echoed now. The hallway was long, impossibly so for a house this small on the outside. It bent gently to the left, opening into a room bathed in faint golden light. A sitting room, with high-backed chairs and a fireplace that hadn't held a flame in years. Dust coated the mantel like snowfall. Yet everything was exactly where it should be. The porcelain tea set on the side table. The unlit lamp in the corner. Even the wool blanket folded neatly over the edge of the couch. She felt like she had stepped into a preserved memory. Her eyes drifted to the mantel, where several framed photographs stood, their glass smudged with age. She picked one up. It showed a family, a mother, a father, a boy of about 8. They were standing on this very porch, the house behind them newer, clean, and full of color. The boy had a balloon tied to his wrist. The father held a basket of apples. The mother wore a brooch shaped like a bird. Evelyn blinked. The mother looked like her, not vaguely, not passingly, but almost exactly. The shape of the jaw, the sharpness of the nose, the way the eyes tilted downward slightly at the edges. The only difference was the hair darker and pinned back neatly in the photo. She set the frame down, her fingers trembling. "Impossible," she murmured. Behind her, the floor creaked. She turned. There was no one there, but the smell of lilac had returned. Stronger now, thick in the air. And something else. Ash. The faintest trace of something burned, like paper caught briefly in a flame. And then she heard it again. The sigh, not from the walls this time. From the parlor doorway. She stepped toward it, slowly, her boots soft on the old rug. The parlor had no windows, just tall bookcases that reached the ceiling, and in the center, the grandfather clock. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, made of dark oak, its face silvered and unreadable in the low light. The pendulum was still, and yet... Evelyn reached out and touched the wood. It was warm. The house wasn't just dreaming. It was awake. Evelyn took a slow step back from the grandfather clock, her fingers tingling from the contact. The wood wasn't just warm. It pulsed faintly beneath her touch, like something alive. She stared at the unmoving pendulum. It seemed too still, not just motionless, but held in place, as though the laws of gravity had briefly forgotten it. Then she heard it again. Not the sigh. This time it was tapping. Faint. Measured. From behind the wall. Tap. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. She held her breath. Leaning in. It came again. Slightly louder, like fingernails or bone tapping against hollow wood. A rhythm. A pattern. She didn't recognize it, but it felt deliberate. She turned, scanning the room. The wallpaper here was darker. Deep green with faded vines climbing toward the crown molding. One of the vines looked wrong. It wasn't printed. It had been drawn on top of the paper in ink. Or charcoal. Her eyes followed it down to the floor, where the rug ended just shy of the wall. A hatch. Nearly invisible, the outline hidden beneath layers of time and dust, but the latch was there. Rusted, with a tiny loop just big enough to hook a finger through. Tap, tap, T, AP. It came again. Urgent now, like something trapped. Or knocking. Evelyn hesitated. Then she crouched and pulled. The hatch groaned open. Darkness poured out, thick and cold, like a breath exhaled from something sleeping below. A narrow wooden staircase descended into black, every step worn by time, and what looked like claw marks. The tapping stopped, but something else rose to meet her. A voice. A child's voice. Soft, near a whisper. Is someone there? She froze, hands still gripping the edge of the hatch. It came again. Please. I've been so quiet. I've been waiting. Evelyn's voice cracked when she tried to speak. Who are you? A pause. Then, with trembling hope, are you my mother? The air grew suddenly colder. The lilac scent vanished, replaced with dust and damp earth. Behind her, the pendulum of the grandfather clock gave a single, slow tick. Just one dot, then silence. Evelyn looked down the stairs. And against every instinct in her body, she descended. The staircase creaked beneath Evelyn's boots as she descended, one careful step at a time. The wood felt soft in places, rotted, as if the stairs themselves had grown tired of holding weight. She ran her hand along the wall to steady herself, rough stone, damp with condensation. The scent of earth grew stronger with every step, curling in her throat. Above her, the hatch slowly creaked shut. Clunk. Darkness swallowed the last of the golden light from the parlor. She was alone now, except for the faint voice that had drawn her down. Are you still there? It was so close now. Not frightened, not desperate, just patient, like it had been asking that same question for a very, very long time. Evelyn reached the bottom. The room was small, no larger than a pantry, and lit by a single, flickering candle in a glass sconce on the wall. Its flame tilted sideways as though reacting to her presence. The walls were stone. The air was still. There were no doors, no windows, and yet, in the far corner sat a small wooden chair. A child's chair. Empty. Evelyn's heart began to race. Where are you? She whispered. No answer. She stepped closer to the chair, crouching beside it. The floor beneath was covered in scratches, marks from something scraping, back and forth, over and over. They formed no clear shape, no words, just endless lines, as if something had been trying to count the days, or scratch its way out. Then, just as she reached out to touch the back of the chair, she heard a slow inhale right behind her. She turned sharply. No one was there. But on the wall behind her, something had changed. Writing now, fresh, written in the same invisible ink from the letter she had found in the square. Only here, the letters burned themselves into view like coals lit beneath paper. You're early. But not too early. The house remembers you, and it still hungers. Evelyn backed away slowly, her foot bumping the leg of the chair. That's when she saw it. A small handprint, child-sized, pressed into the stone beside the chair. Not drawn, burned into it. The fingers long, too long, with the pinky bent at an impossible angle. Behind her, the candle flickered out. Darkness rushed in like a scream with no mouth. Total darkness blanketed the cellar like soil on a coffin. Evelyn stood motionless, listening. Her own breath was ragged. Each inhale scraped at her lungs like cold ash. The silence was so complete, so heavy, that she could hear her own heartbeat pulsing in her ears. Then came the whisper, not a voice. Not this time, just breath. Long, slow, and wet. Hiya, it drifted from behind the wall. No, beneath it. She crouched instinctively, one hand pressed to the stone floor. It pulsed just slightly, like something below was shifting, turning over in its sleep. The vibrations were faint, but rhythmic. Slow. Alive. Evelyn reached out along the floor until her fingers found the chair again. She gripped one of its legs, something tangible, solid. Her fingers brushed against something else. Paper. She pulled it close and stood, fumbling for her phone in her coat pocket. No signal, no flashlight, but the screen gave just enough light to read what she'd found. It was a child's drawing. Stick figures, a tall house, a dark sky. But the figures, there were too many legs, and too many eyes. One of the figures was clearly a child, smiling. The others had scribbled faces, wide mouths like slashes. Underneath was written, in shaky block letters, "They come when I sleep." Evelyn swallowed hard, heart thudding louder now. Then she heard the stone behind her groan. Creaking. A seam split in the wall, thin and vertical, like a door being born from the stone. Dust fell in soft clouds. Evelyn stepped back as the crack widened, inch by inch, groaning as though it had been sealed for centuries. From the blackness within came a sound that made her skin go cold. Drip, drip, drip. Water? No. Thicker, heavier. Something slithered along the floor just inside the seam. A voice whispered, not a child's this time. Older, dry, as if made of dust and bones. You brought it back. Evelyn's knees weakened. I don't know what you mean. The voice chuckled, a low rasp like claws on wood. But it knows you. It dreams of you. You were always meant to return. The stone door jolted open another inch. She turned and bolted for the stairs, but they were gone. Just a wall now. No hatch. No steps. No exit. She was sealed in, and something behind her was waking up. Evelyn slammed her back against the cold stone wall where the stairs had vanished, heart hammering like a drum in a storm. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of earth and rot, and beneath it, something older, a sweetness that turned her stomach. The whispering voice faded, replaced by a new sound. Slow, deep breathing, not her own. Something massive, waiting just beyond the darkness. She fumbled in her pocket for the letter, the one that had brought her here, but her fingers found only empty fabric. It must have fallen somewhere in the house. Panic rose, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. The house was watching, listening, and somehow, somewhere, it dreamed that a low rumble shook the walls. Then, from the black doorway behind her, a pair of eyes opened. They were too big to be human. Dark pools glowing faintly with an inner light, reflecting the flicker of the candle still burning on the stone floor. The eyes blinked slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Evelyn's voice barely formed a whisper. "Who are you?" The voice came again, closer this time, layered with 1,000 muted echoes. "I am the dream beneath the house. The shadow in the stone, the hunger in the walls." A shape emerged. A shifting, mist-like form, vaguely humanoid, yet distorted and flickering as if struggling to maintain shape. "I am waiting for the family who forgot me. Waiting for the child who never left." Evelyn's breath caught. The voice softened, almost pleading. "Come back to the light. Remember, the house was alive, and it remembered everything, including her." The misty shape floated closer, its glowing eyes fixed on Evelyn like a spotlight in the dark. The warmth of the candle flickered low, casting long shadows that twisted and danced across the stone walls. Evelyn's knees trembled, but she forced herself to stay rooted in the cold cellar. "I don't understand," she said, voice small but steady. "Who's the child? What family? Why am I here?" The dream's voice softened, sighing like a breeze through dead leaves. "Long ago, before the house grew old and tired, a family lived here. A mother, a father, and a boy who loved to chase lanterns. But the boy never left. He stayed trapped between the walls, forgotten by time." Evelyn's mind raced. The photograph on the mantel, the voice behind the hatch, the burned handprint. "You mean the child in the house?" "Yes," the shape replied. "I am the house's memory, the echo of all that was lost. You carry the bloodline, the same blood that once walked these halls. You are the one who can wake the house, or let it sleep forever. A cold chill ran down Evelyn's spine, but within it was a strange comfort. How do I wake it? The mist pulsed, the eyes glowing brighter. By remembering, by seeing through the dreams, by loving what was lost. The candle sputtered out, plunging the cellar into darkness again. But Evelyn no longer felt alone. She whispered, "I will remember." When the candle died, the darkness in the cellar thickened like velvet, but Evelyn's fear had somehow shifted. Instead of panicking, she felt a strange calm, as if the house itself was holding her gently. Suddenly, the wall before her shimmered, like a heat wave rising from a summer road.